Welcome to the Confessions of a Working Mom podcast, where we bring you real-life working mom stories, tips, tricks, and advice for thriving and surviving in motherhood. Because you shouldn't have to experience working motherhood alone. Join our community of support as we discuss all of the things and how we get by in this sometimes crazy and imperfect journey of working motherhood. Hello and welcome to episode number 19 of the Confessions of a Working Mom podcast. On today's episode, I am wrapping up season number 1 of the podcast, as well as talking about slowing down and resting during the holiday season, which I know we all need to do as busy working moms, busy parents in general. And I'm also announcing a giveaway that I'm going to be featuring. So I will go into more details of this at the end of the episode, but please, if you can, leave a rating and review for the podcast, and you'll be entered to win one of 6 prizes, which, like I said, I will go into the details later on in the podcast about that. But I'd like to just start with lessons learned from season 1 of the podcast and the themes I noticed that would continuously show throughout my conversations with all of the different working moms that I've talked to. It has been such an amazing season talking to all of these moms, and I just feel like I've gained such an important amount of information in this time and have gained friends, have gained potential collaborations and colleagues, and I just am very thankful for the opportunity to have talked to all of these amazing women during this time. So if I can go back to the beginning of when this podcast first started. When I started in episode 1, I talked about how we are all in our own unique motherhood journeys and how there's many different paths we can take in these motherhood journeys. And that became really a reoccurring theme throughout this whole season. I feel like each mom that I've talked to on this podcast, this has come up in our conversation, and really what I've gathered from it is we sort of have a tendency sometimes to compare each other's journeys, but in all reality, we're all unique in what works best for us and our families. And I think that's a major theme that has come out of season number 1. Then heading into episode number 2, and this was back in July of 2020, I had released an episode with LaJuan Moses of the More Than a Mother podcast. And this was a really important episode for me because it took a very difficult conversation with racial justice and inclusivity and social justice and just having that difficult conversation in a public space. And I thank LaJuan for being so open to have that conversation with me. Some of the takeaways I got from that episode, in addition to talking about becoming supportive allies for Black working moms, we also talked about taking time for ourselves as working moms to rest and recharge. So this brings me to another theme throughout season number 1. I think this topic came up time and time again in relation to taking time for ourselves to rest and reset and recharge. Because in essence, if we are not caring for ourselves, and resting and allowing ourselves to recharge and reset for the next day and for the weeks ahead. As we know, 2020 was not really a walk in the park for many of us. So when we take the time to do that, we can better support all of the other pieces of our lives that we need to manage. So then heading into episode number 3 of this season, we had talked about taking care of our financial and mental health. And I had Maggie Germano, who is a financial coach for women, on the podcast. And I thought this was an extremely important topic, especially in the climate of this year. The biggest takeaway from that was how important it is to consider our mental health as it relates to our financial health. And like I said, especially in the year 2020, with all of the uncertainty, a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people are pivoting in their careers. A lot of people are having to make decisions to do what's best for their families. And that can lead to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of anxiety around managing the financial aspects of it. So that was a really great conversation that I go back to often, and I've evaluated more so, what I mean. It's what I think it means to be financially healthy. So that was a great one to go check out. So then heading into episode number 4 of the podcast, I talked to Mary Zergarian, who is a mindset coach for working moms, and she also hosts the Mom Fuel podcast. Some of the major takeaways in my conversation with Mary were how we can push past mindset blockers as busy moms, and also how we can find ways to simplify our busy lives, which I think this is another reoccurring theme that comes up throughout this season. We talk a lot about mindset and really getting into a mindset that allows us to make forward progress. Sometimes we can get so stuck in our own heads and not even realize that we're doing it, and it just can be paralyzing sometimes. So my conversation with Mary, we really dived into sort of dealing with the overwhelm that comes up again and again as working moms. Like I said, overcoming those mindset blockers that are often holding us back. And we also talked about how to start a side hustle as a working mom, which a lot of moms are kind of exploring that this year because, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's a huge year for pivoting for a lot of working parents. And we're sort of evaluating what works best for our families. And sometimes that might look like starting a business on the side. Maybe it looks like taking a part-time job and working on your business on the side, or maybe it looks like pivoting entirely to that business because it works better for your family. So Mary had a lot of great tips on how to go about starting a side hustle and managing that. I definitely recommend going back to that episode if you're interested in hearing those tips. So then transitioning to episode number 5, we talked about a huge working mom topic that is reoccurring no matter where I look, all over social media, on blogs, on podcasts, and that is mom burnout. And in this episode, I talked to Liz Heron, who hosts the Do the Damn Thing podcast. And we talked about how to fight burnout, what you can do to actually stop it in its tracks and to not let it get so out of control. We also talked about finding your passion, or how to actually live out your passion if you've already found it. So that kind of goes back to, doing things for yourself first, because if you do things for yourself first, ultimately it will just allow you to be even more present for your family. And then, of course, we talked about banishing overwhelming feelings, fighting burnout, and then stepping into the life we deserve. So I feel like this was another major reoccurring topic throughout season 1, talking about sort of living the life we deserve and not living the life someone else told us we had to live. So I think a lot of the conversations this season came back to this statement, and it all goes back to sort of taking care of yourself first before you can take care of others, filling your own cup up first before you can take care of your family. Because if you don't, and if you let it get out of control, and if you let the burnout and overwhelm take over your life, then you don't have anything left to give to other people. So in episode number 6 with Amber, we talked about using holistic methods of stress relief as well as positive mindset tools, which include yoga, meditation, and mindfulness as ways to take care of you and your family. So I think this was a really great transition episode coming out of the burnout episode, because a lot of times we talk about self-care and what does self-care look like for working moms. What does that look like in our daily lives? For some, it may look like doing a daily yoga or meditation practice. For others, it may look like taking 10 minutes in the morning to have a cup of coffee by yourself and to read a good book. So I think this was another great theme that came up throughout the season number 1, and is where we're talking to different moms about how they cope with stress and anxiety and burnout, all in different ways. So it might not all look the same, but we're ultimately trying to get to the same outcome, which is to reduce stress, reduce burnout, become more positive, get to a place of more positive thinking, pursue our goals, be able to do these things, and be able to take care of our families at the same time. So I really think that Amber's episode talking about using positive mindset tools, cope, I think is a really great method for some of us, which I do a yoga practice daily myself too. And then transitioning to episode number 7, we talked about a topic that I wouldn't say most of us ignore, but maybe it goes to the back burner sometimes. So Emily Siegel of the Connected Mom Life podcast came on the show to talk about building your village as a working mom and how to make authentic connections. So often we kind of go through our lives, especially after we have kids, we have a couple main focuses, usually family life, work life, maintaining relationships with our spouses, and taking care of all those pieces of our lives. Often another aspect, which is maintaining friendships or building authentic relationships with like-minded people or building authentic connections, kind of takes a back seat because there's just so many other things going on in our lives. So I thought this was a really great conversation with Emily because she gives some really tangible tips on how to go about sort of building your village and making those authentic connections, and some ways that we can do that, because it's not always something that kind of falls onto our radar, onto our priority list. And especially a good tip that came out of that episode, even us introverted moms can build authentic connections and authentic relationships with people. And she gives some really great tips on how to do that. So I think, so far in season 1 at this point, we really dived into a lot of important topics that resonate with many different moms. And going into episode number 8, then we talk a little bit about managing stress and anxiety in motherhood. So this episode, I talked to Alex Haynes, who is a life coach for moms who specializes in anxiety, stress, and low self-worth. And this was another, I think, a really reoccurring topic throughout the season as well. So again and again, I noticed themes of how do we manage our stress? How do we manage our anxiety? How do we manage a feeling of out of control? Or how do we manage a feeling of overwhelm in our daily lives? So Alex who specifically deals in these types of topics came on the show and gave us some great tips for reducing stress in our lives, especially in this year 2020, because let's face it, this year has not been a stress-free year for any of us. No matter what way we look at it, we've all had our different coping mechanisms, but sometimes it's nice just to hear other moms are sort of going through the same things and some real tangible advice that we can take away and get some tips for managing it. So if you want to check that one out, go back to episode number 8. So then we come up to episode number 9 in season 1. Episode number 9, I chatted with Dana Underwood of Avanti Alliance. Dana is a career coach, and she helps working moms to find a career that fits their lives rather than the other way around. So some of the major takeaways from this episode were she really, with her clients, wants them to get super clear. So I think this really goes back to one of the central themes that has popped up again and again throughout season 1 of the podcast, which is finding your own path in being a working mom and really sort of defining what that looks like for you, because not all of us define success in the same way. So going back to, our version and our definition of success and what makes us happy and what fulfills us, and really getting super clear about what we want and what we need from our lives and our careers. So I think Dana really put a spotlight on, we have to really sit down and dig deep and really answer these questions from within ourselves, because we can't look to others to define what truly makes us happy. And I think that was a reoccurring theme throughout this season as well. So then going into episode number 10 of the season, I talked to Dr. Marlise Hubner. She formed the Craft One Life coaching business and also the Rapid Anger Relief program. So Marlise is an emotional resilience coach. And this was a very eye-opening topic for me, and something that I haven't really seen talked about a whole lot on different podcasts and online in general. So we dived into dealing with anger issues and dealing with triggering moments of motherhood. So this is actually really interesting, and Marlise also has a 5-day challenge called the Rapid Anger Relief Challenge, and she conducts that challenge like once a month on Facebook in a private Facebook group. I actually just participated in it this past week, and I have to tell you, what she's teaching in there is absolutely life-changing. If you have small children, if you're dealing with a lot of stressors in your life, and you have those moments where you know that you're not reacting in a healthy way, but it's just sort of overcoming the sort of anger that bubbles up and these triggering moments. So Marlise, what she does is she really tries to address the triggers, and the triggers can be things that come from our own childhoods. So she gets pretty deep into this, and she tries to address the triggers through her rapid anger response method and really digs deep into the underlying reasons why we're reacting in these ways in the first place. And she really specifies, like, instead of a mask, like she calls self-care a sort of a mask, which is interesting. It's an interesting perspective because I believe sort of in both methods. I believe in the self-care method, but I also really, really took away a lot out of her rapid anger relief challenge this past week. So I think both working hand in hand could be really great coping mechanisms. And, Marlise is just a super interesting and knowledgeable person. We really talked about like getting to a healthy place emotionally where you can truly deal with the stressors of life without coming totally unraveled. And I think, isn't that sort of something all of us struggle with at one point or another in motherhood, in parenting in general? Just, finding a way to deal with things in a positive way, in a healthy way, and not letting all of our underlying triggers and issues bubble up to the surface when we're dealing with our kids. It might be like a frustrating moment, but we take a step back and maybe there's a better way to deal with all of that. So definitely highly recommend going to check out episode number 10 with Marlise. I think there's a lot of great value in there. And again, check out her challenge on Facebook as well. So then in episode number 11, I talked to Carmen Benton of the Confident Working Mom podcast. And Carmen is a life plan coach. So she also works a corporate job, but her business is life planning and coaching. And she really leverages life planning for a better way of sort of balancing and managing everything that she has going on in her life. And so it was a really great conversation with Carmen. She actually is a mother to 6 children, lives in Alaska, and is doing the corporate working mom thing plus having a business on the side. So she is just doing it all. And she has a method of how to make it all work. And I think that was such an important conversation and another reoccurring theme that comes up often in season number 1, which is how do you really truly make all of the pieces of your life work together when sometimes you feel like you're being pulled in 1,000 opposite directions at once. But how do you sort of make everything fit together and not get stressed out, not get burned out? Obviously, we're not going to totally eradicate stress from our lives because that's just a part of living. But just to get to these better methods for dealing with busy life, busy mom life, and how to form a life plan to help you out with all those pieces. So then transitioning to episode number 12, I talked to Tony Ann Mayembe of the Real Happy Mom podcast and blog. And we talked about preparing ahead of time for your weeks to get rid of the overwhelm and how to get organized and prep ahead of time. So like prepping meals, prepping like your kids' clothes in the morning for the next day, prepping your own clothes for the morning, kind of laying out your schedule and your calendar and fitting all the pieces together and to where you're supposed to be going and what are you supposed to be doing for that week ahead. And just sharing tips in general for organizing your life as a busy working mom. So I think this is super important, not in a way to kind of shame moms who do not have the perfect planning system in place, because I know there's many different variations of planning and different types of planning. And so we're not all going to do this exactly the same way, but I think Tony just has some really great tips for how to get started if you want to move towards the direction of becoming a better planner. Because ultimately, and what I took away from this episode was it's only going to help you in the long run if you plan things, because it's going to free up your mind and give you more mental capacity to do important things. So it's only a positive benefit. So then diving into episode number 13, I talked to Jenny Elliott of the Career Mom podcast. And Jenny is well known for her story on navigating her own identity crisis as a working mom, like when she became a new working mom and kind of feeling sort of lost as a new mom. Like, where do I belong? Where do I go from here? My priorities have sort of changed. Now I have this new life to take care of. I have this new person in my life. Sort of what direction do I go from here? Because I've never had to deal with this before. It's always been sort of me, or if you're married, it's been you and your spouse. But once you add that child in, it becomes a whole different sort of thing to manage. So some of the major takeaways from this episode, basically we talked about how it's okay to feel lost as a new mom. So we all have sort of a different sense of an identity shift to deal with when we become a mom. And what we do and how we actually shape ourselves as working moms comes from those defining moments. And those moments are the ones that we have to face our ambitions and our passions and determine how to best move forward as working moms. So we also dived into this episode sort of about redefining what it means to be an ambitious working mom and talked about leaning out instead of leaning in, which I thought was a super interesting topic because a lot of the times we hear about Sheryl Sandberg's concept of leaning into your career and acting more like a man would act in your career. Taking, ownership of things and putting yourself out there to show that you want more leadership positions and you want more responsibility and you want all of these things. But as coming from a perspective of working moms talking to other working moms on podcasts like this, a group of us that have sort of taken on a sort of opposite belief and think that more of leaning out is the way to go. And by leaning out, it's more of really doing what works best for you and your family. And it doesn't mean that you're giving up all ambitions in your career. It doesn't mean you're giving up all ambitions in your life. It doesn't mean that at all. But what it really means is that you are defining your own interpretation of success. And so I think that is a really huge theme that I would like people to take away out of this season of the Confessions of a Working Mom podcast. Everyone's definition of success is different, and how we define it should lead us to our path in working motherhood. So it could be different from person to person. So I thought that was a really great conversation. If you want to go back to that one, that was episode number 13. So then in episode number 14, we talked about supporting new moms in their transition to motherhood and in their return to work. So they kind of go hand in hand, coming out of the identity crisis as a new working mom, and then going into how do we support these new working moms into their transition and into their return to work, because it's really not easy going from, going out on maternity leave and then being gone for a certain amount of time and then trying to transition back. It's a real challenge for some of us. So Kimberly Didrikson came on the show to talk about how she and her organization called Learning Motherhood actually gives moms the tools to not feel so alone in their transition back to work. So she really tries to set new moms up with the information that they can bring back to their employers so they can be ready to sort of have those difficult conversations, but really bring to the table what they need from their employer in order for them to be successful. Because ultimately, moms returning to work, moms are, that's employers want to retain moms. And so it really is a good thing for moms to kind of have all this information readily available to give to their employers, because sometimes, employers have good intentions, but maybe they don't have everything figured out. But if you have a plan of action walking into your return to work, I think that's going to make you, appear organized and efficient and is a really good retention strategy as well. So some more takeaways from episode number 14 with Kimberly. So asking for help and support inside the home and outside the home. So we talked about sort of not doing everything alone. Obviously, in some situations, such as single parenting, that's a hard thing to not do things alone. But even if you can get some support elsewhere, if it's your own parents or a sister or a brother or a close friend, going back to like building the village with Emily Siegel, if you can build that village of support and get support both inside and outside the home, it's going to make your transition back into your career smoother. So then diving into episode number 15 of season number 1. Episode number 15 was with Krista L. Thompson, who is a lawyer and a single working mom to 3 kids under the age of 4. And I had a really eye-opening, great conversation with her. So she essentially talked about recovering from this idea of being a superwoman. And that's actually what her blog is called, Recovering Superwoman. So the definition of this is sort of recovering from the idea of having to do it all and be it all. And I think a lot of us moms can relate to that because we put so much pressure on ourselves typically to do it all and be it all for everybody. And I think sometimes we just need to let go of that and realize that it's sort of an impossible standard that we're setting ourselves up to. So I think that's another reoccurring theme throughout season 1 is sort of, letting go of this idea of perfection in motherhood. Some other things we talked about were this idea of how all moms are working moms. This has really been the year to sort of redefine parenting and redefine like working parenting and how we all have to sort of deal with work home balance in a way that we never had to deal with it before. Okay, so some more takeaways from episode 15. Krista and I also talked about how it's totally okay to not be okay. And it's totally okay to need a break from the 24/7 constant nature of motherhood. And it's totally okay to need an extra glass of wine at the end of the night, at the end of a busy day. So we just talked about how, we need to normalize sort of not being okay and talk about it more, because the more we talk about it among each other, I think that it'll become a better catalyst for solutions that can come out of these discussions. And some of the other key takeaways I just wanted to mention. So Krista, I ask this question in every episode at the end of the show. I always ask every working mom what their non-negotiable practices that they must do daily in order to start or end their day on a positive note. So Krista's answer really stood out to me because she said she didn't really have one and it was too much pressure to expect everybody to have a non-negotiable practice. So she said instead just to do what works for you best, for what works for you and what works for your family, and set boundaries and make those boundaries very clear to others. So I thought that was just an awesome answer to that question because I know, a lot of times we think our non-negotiable looks like maybe a self-care practice, which that's also great and I highly recommend that as well. But just taking the advice of doing what works best for us in the moment of time that we're in, I think it's such a grounding and such a sort of like you just want to let out a big sigh of relief type of moment, because then you're not sort of under this intense pressure to do something repeatedly every day. Instead, you just do what works best for you in the moment. So I love that. So another key takeaway is the choices we must make as working moms are never easy. especially in this year of the pandemic of 2020 and just all of the decisions we've had to make as working moms and working parents. Some of us are rethinking the way we work. We're rethinking our careers. We're rethinking our lives because everything has been just so upended. So I think, in this key takeaway, I'd really like to just mention that, we really need to give each other grace and respect and just realize that we're all just sort of doing the best we can with what we've been given. And then the third takeaway I wanted to mention from Krista's interview is normalizing the struggle. So let's not accept that this is how it should be as working parents, but let's normalize that we're struggling so we can, attempt to come up with some solutions for the struggles and sort of bring these struggles to light in front of employers, in front of companies, in front of society, in front of our friends, in front of our families, just so we can make more people aware of how there is a struggle that needs to be addressed, that needs to be normalized, and we need to come up with more positive solutions that work for families moving forward. So in episode number 16 of the podcast, I had talked to Maria Smith of the Confessions of a Corporate Mom website and blog. And this was just a overall encompassing great episode for all working moms because we kind of touched on every single topic you can imagine in the working mom space. So some of the main takeaways that I got out of this episode is that we're all similar as working moms and we're all in this journey together. And then we also dived into letting go of perfectionism, mom guilt, and the struggle of trying to balance it all and becoming more thoughtful and intentional about setting goals as working moms. So Maria and I really had such a fantastic conversation on episode number 16. If you want to go back and listen to that one, I'd highly recommend that one. So then transitioning into episode number 17, where I talked to Dr. Angela Potter. So Dr. Potter is actually a naturopath doctor who helps moms balance their hormones and take care of themselves holistically. So this was a great episode to sort of get more into some health-based conversations, but that could really help moms who are just coming from, postpartum. They're kind of experiencing some things in their bodies that they've never had to deal with before because, a lot of changes occur in your body during pregnancy and after pregnancy and for, several years afterwards. So some of the key takeaways from this episode were how changes in your body post-birth are totally normal. A lot of us experience like the sort of baby blues that we talk about. So we dive deeper into that in episode number 17. Also, we talked about how there's natural ways to treat hormonal changes and imbalances and how Dr. Potter actually helps women heal strong and have balanced moods after birth. And we talk about how getting your hormones tested is super important, getting your blood work done, having good nutrition practices to support your healing. So a lot of just great information in this episode to help all new moms deal with some of the changes in their bodies that occur. Episode number 18 takes us to Marissa Lanick of Let Mama Work It. And with Marissa, I talked about time management for working moms, how to better manage your time without the overwhelm, without the guilt, and really truly starting to take care of yourself and put into practice things you need to be better organized that will ultimately give you more sanity in your life. So some of the takeaways from Marissa were letting go of perfection in motherhood. So there's another reoccurring theme. We had talked about that with Maria Smith as well in episode 16. And really being intentional with our time as moms so we can accomplish our goals. And something that really struck me from Marissa's conversation is how when she was talking about how we have to believe in our worthiness and do the things that we want to do for ourselves. And especially when she said we need to balance our ambitions and wanting to be a kick-ass mom. So there's this constant type of struggle between wanting to be a good mom versus wanting to follow our own goals. But she says when you feel good, you do good. And taking time for yourself is just as important because once you do, you'll realize how much you truly needed that time to balance the other areas of your life as a mom, a spouse, daughter, friend, an employee, etc. So I thought that was just a really great conversation to sort of wrap up, the whole conversation on how we really do need to take care of ourselves as working moms. Okay, so then rounding out and coming up to the 19th episode of the podcast, which is the latest episode that's actually available this week as I'm recording. So it is December 21st right now. So this episode just came out. And I talked to Sabra Ritter of Beautiful Chaos blog. And our conversation was extremely powerful because of how real it was. And I just have to say, I thank Sabra so much for coming on and being so honest and raw with this conversation. So we dived into, topics of postpartum anxiety and stress and depression. And how do we kind of come out of this? Where do we go from here? And a big part of this episode was coming back to the theme of how we need to talk about our struggles more, normalize the struggle. So we had also mentioned this in a previous episode about normalizing the struggle. And another thing that came out of this was how sharing our stories is super powerful, and realizing that we are not alone in this journey of motherhood. And I really think that this kind of rounds out the whole message of the Confessions of a Working Mom podcast and why I started in the first place. Why I started this podcast was to make moms feel like they are not alone. And typically, if you have something going on in your life, if you have a struggle, there's probably someone else who's gone through it. And I wanted to bring all of those stories to light and to just share all of these stories with you, the listeners. So I really think that, I think this was a great season 1, in which we had many, many different working moms come on and share their stories. And I really hope that you were able to gain insights and to gain some valuable resources, and to know that you are such an important part of this working mom and this motherhood community. And without you guys, this podcast would not be possible. So just thank you so much for continuing to support and listen each week. And I cannot wait to release season number 2 coming in January 2021. There's going to be lots of more great interviews with different working moms, and even going to throw in a few solo episodes here and there. Although I'll be completely honest, those are a little bit harder for me to do being the introvert that I am, but I'm excited to try to throw those solo episodes in and to bring more great working mom topics to you guys in 2021. So with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season. Have a happy new year ringing in 2021. Let's hope, 2021 has to be better than 2020. I would think again and again, we've mentioned how 2020 has just been a chaotic year for most working moms and working parents. So here's to hoping that 2021 will bring better things for all of us, and I hope to see you in 2021. So thank you so much for listening.
Hey, well, this is it. So thanks for listening to my mama's friends. And Mama, hey Mama, can we listen to season 2 now?
Thank you so much for listening in today to Confessions of a Working Mom podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes of this episode for all the links to what we've talked about today. Also, head on over to theworkingmomcollective.com to sign up for my free 5-day challenge for creating a working mom non-negotiable routine. We've all been there, stressed out, burnt out, and overwhelmed as working moms handling all of the things. My free challenge will walk you through, step by step, my exact method for creating a working mom routine that takes you from burnout to actually waking up and feeling great about your day. And finally, please subscribe to this podcast and rate and review if you have a few minutes. Tell your working mom friends and anyone else that might be interested in this content. I'd love as many moms as possible to gain value from the podcast. If you'd like to nominate someone or yourself to be a guest, please contact me at kelly@theworkingmomcollective.com. I am so happy you chose to listen in today, and I cannot wait to dive into next week's topic with you.